in prayer, study, dialogue, in humility and obedience, so that we may be convincing witnesses and joyful proclaimers of the gospel. We entrust to you in a special way the work of this conference through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Solene Tadie, Europe correspondent for EWTN News. Thank you very much, Ulf, and thank you very much, Father, for this introduction. It is my privilege to moderate this Gotland Forum in this very special location in this Museum of Visby to discuss the foundations of our Western civilization through the history of the Christianization of the Nordic peoples, of which the island of Gotland is a high symbol, as it is known as the Church of 100 Island. It has over 100 churches that were built. It's the island of 100 churches. Most of them were built during the first half of the 14th century. So this place certainly has a lot to say about the Christian history of Sweden, the northern countries in general, and by extension to the whole of Christendom. So EWTN Northern and Low Countries organized this event for this precise reason. They believe that the study of the long process of Christianization in pagan Scandinavia between the 8th and the 12th centuries, which had also a considerable impact on the development of its kingdoms and the expansion of Viking and Varangian people into many parts of the world, can provide valuable insight for the people of the rest of Europe nowadays, who are increasingly oblivious to the fundamental contributions of Christianity to the very essence of their civilization. And at the same time, they are increasingly tempted, and often unwittingly, by to pagan codes and lifestyles, as we will also discuss later, notably with Professor Chantal Del Sol. So this perspective is all the more relevant as we seem to be witnessing also a revival of a certain of the Catholic faith in northern countries, in Norway to some degree, but specifically in Sweden. And it is even more interesting as these countries have been at the forefront of the dechristianization of Europe over the past decades. So I will leave it to His Eminence the Cardinal Arborelius to enlighten us about this subject, which will also serve as a starting point from which to explore a number of related aspects to better understand our current world and its challenges, including, for instance, the role of the Swedish Vikings in the creation of the medieval Kiev Rus states, which will highlight the very ancient relations between our countries and our civilization. And through the lens of Christian history of the Nordic peoples, we will also look at other things, like the way in which Christianity was inculturated into Germanic society, and finally the constituent element of what it is, a civilization, what makes it live and what makes it fall as well. So this discussion promised to be very rich, so I'm going to give the floor without delay to His Eminence Cardinal Anders Arborelius, Bishop of Stockholm, who has honored us with his presence tonight. Thank you very much, Your Eminence. Just one quick comment for all those watching from around the world. Feel free to leave a comment or ask your question in the chat, and they will be addressed tomorrow during our roundtable at the same hour, at the same time tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this possibility to reach out to people all over the world. And we are always flattered that people are so interested in our humble reality in Northern Europe. Catholics are very few, 1 or 2%. Sweden has a strong Lutheran tradition, and we are very happy to be also guests in the Diocese of Visby of the Lutheran Church, where we have very good relationships. So I would say Gotland is a very important historic place, but also a place for the future. Here people can really cherish the rich tradition, but they can also see how can we move forwards as Christians in a secular society where Christians are in minority. And I think it's important to know that Sweden is supposed together with the all other Nordic countries, to be the most secular part of Europe. But at the same time, it's one of the few parts of Europe where the Catholic Church is growing, mainly thanks to immigration. And even in a little parish like this, it's the smallest parish of our diocese, not even 200 people, but there are people from Africa, from the Middle East, from Poland, and everywhere. So that's a typical sign of the Catholic Church in Sweden, that it's so international. In most parishes, we as Swedes are in minority. And I think that's a very good experience for us to see that we have to integrate with people from all over the world in order to form a Catholic community in this country. And we have to do it also in dialogue with the other churches. I'm not only the only Catholic bishop in Scandinavia or in Sweden, but this year I'm also president of the Ecumenical Council of Sweden. So that means that I have to have the balance between being pastor for people from all over the world who try to form a unity in faith, hope, and charity in a new setting. And we know it's not always easy to adapt to a new reality. People coming from other cultures that are more religious, where the church is stronger, and here Christians are few and Catholics even fewer. But at the same time we see that it's possible to build up a fraternal community where people from all over the world can be united by faith. Because that's the only thing we have in common as Catholics in Sweden. We belong to various parts of the world, but also various parts of the society. We could say the church, the Catholic Church in Sweden, is strongest in the most poor suburbs of the big cities. There are many Catholics, and just to tell you a little sign of our ecumenical situation, in Stockholm we have been able to buy 3 Lutheran churches in areas where the Swedes have moved out. So the Church of Sweden had the grace to invite us to buy these churches that they don't need anymore, because many of those suburbs have become very segregated. Very few Swedes are left. Those who are there are either Catholic, Muslims, or Orthodox. Also the Orthodox Church could buy Zurich Orthodox Church in Stockholm. So we could say our challenge is to help people from all over the world to get integrated into our church, and that will also help them to be integrated into the society. And we see, maybe you have all read about the difficult situation in many suburbs of Stockholm, where young people are killing each other in those gangs, in this criminality, this drug business. So we have a great challenge in our church to help especially the second generation of immigrants to adapt to a new society. On the surface, Sweden is very secular, but behind the screen and under the surface, there is a religious opening. And that's what we see in Sweden, that people are more interested in, for instance, spirituality than we think. We have published many books on spiritual life, according to Carmelite, Ignatian, Dominican, Franciscan, and Benedictine spirituality. But those books are mostly read by non-Catholics, because Catholics in Sweden are mostly foreigners. They don't read so much in Swedish, but they are read by pastors in the Lutheran Church, in the free churches, and ordinary Swedes. So, on the level of spirituality, we have a very vivid ecumenical dialogue and community. The Catholic Church has returned to Sweden after many years, and gradually we have become an integrated part of the religious geography of Sweden. And that's what we see, that our brothers and sisters in other churches are often very eager that we take part in the ecumenical dialogue. And I know here in Gotland there is a very vivid ecumenical dialogue. And that helps also our Catholics to see that they are accepted in Sweden with their faith, with their tradition, and many people say we are enriched by the immigrants coming from Catholic countries, from Orthodox countries, and together we can strengthen the Christian presence in Sweden. And we could even say the religious presence in Sweden, because of course many have come here who have other religions with them, the Muslim faith, the Jewish faith, the Buddhist faith. So in a way, I would say that Sweden has been secularized for such a long time that people are beginning to think it's boring. And that's the worst thing, to be bored. So people are more open to religion as such. That doesn't mean that they're always open to Christianity, to the Catholic faith, but to religion as such is not something that they are afraid of anymore. There was a time when to say that you were religious was something terrible. Är du religiös? Are you religious? It was something terrible to hear before. But today, many young people, they haven't heard about, they don't know who Jesus is, they don't know anything. But they found it interesting to see that there is something more than music, sex, money, progress, that there is a God. And I think we have a unique possibility to reach out to so many people in our secular society. As a Catholic Church, we are very small, we don't have so many means. But I think together with other churches, we have a unique possibility to reach out to people and help them to find God. And as Catholics, our main concern, of course, is to help the second generation of immigrants to become integrated in the church, and through being integrated in the church, integrated in the society. But of course, it's not so easy, because still there is a secular atmosphere. It can be very difficult for young people to continue to be part of the parish, to continue to come to church, to continue to strengthen their faith. But I am full of admiration for all those young Catholics who have a very profound and devout faith. I had the privilege to be in Lisbon a few weeks ago for the World Youth Day with nearly 500 young people from Sweden. And that's a lot for our circumstances. And to see how eager they are to go to confession, to pray, and to attend the meetings with the Holy Father. So in that sense, I'm very hopeful. And for instance, this year, 6 young men will start to study for the priesthood. There are also people entering religious life. So there are signs of hope in our society of Sweden. But at the same time, there are many challenges, because a very materialistic, individualistic society has a kind of attraction for many people. And that's why it's so important for us as Catholics to work together with the other churches in order to create a kind of common atmosphere. And we are very happy for the Orthodox presence in Sweden, and we could say that the presence of so many Christians from the Middle East has meant a lot in order to vitalize the Christian presence in Sweden. Many of them are Orthodox, many are Catholics, some are Protestants, but their experience of living in a hostile environment has given them a very strong faith, and they're not afraid to stand up for the faith. Young people of that background can be very helpful to help our young people to be proud of their faith. I always remember a young Chaldean lad who was very eager to evangelize through his tattoo. He had the entire Last Supper on his arm. Of course, that's something I wouldn't recommend to everyone, but it's a sign that they are not afraid to show their faith in a society where it's not always so easy to stand up for the faith. So we could say in Northern Europe, the Catholic faith is growing. It's the same situation, especially in Norway, Finland. There are less Catholics, Denmark also, and Iceland has the highest percentage of Catholics in Northern Europe. So our Bishops' Conference, comprising 5 countries, is a small conference, but lately we find that people in the major Catholic countries are also interested in our situation because they see the development in the secularized Europe means that they will become smaller. And then it's very important to see and to accept a new reality, to be what is called a creative minority, a prophetic minority. We cannot speak for all the society, but if we have a stronger, profound faith, we can give a message to a secular society. And sometimes they even listen to us. And, well, I don't say always. There are some questions where they will never listen to us. One of the difficult things is abortion. If we say that we are against abortion, people are scandalized. But we have to say it. We have to proclaim the worth of every single human being from the first moment up until the last. So we also have to accept that sometimes they will attack us, that they will say that we are, from the Middle Ages. But then we say the Middle Ages were not only a dark period, it was also a period of faith and love and hope. So I would say we have a paradoxical reality as Christians and even more so as Catholics in the Scandinavian countries. But as a rule, I could say we have a very hopeful attitude because we see that the Catholic Church is growing. I said that we are able to buy churches, we are able to establish new parishes. I have been now bishop for 25 years, so next year I will be 75, so I hope the Holy Father will allow me to go back to my monastery. As you see, I'm a Carmelite, and I have been able to inaugurate nearly 25 churches during these years. So we see that's a period of growth, it's a period of hope, it's a period of evangelization. And I try to convince our Catholics that we have to be a more evangelizing church. I remember once meeting a very good Protestant man who said to me, "We are so happy with you because you don't make any mission here." I was a bit taken back, but he meant it as a compliment. But I took it as we have to be a more missionary, evangelizing church in Sweden. And of course, we also have our temptations. We come from various countries, and there is also the tendency to keep to the group. After the Mass, when we have church coffee, people gather at one table speaking Polish, one table speaking Arabic, one table speaking Spanish. And maybe that's our temptation, that we try to become a group of people from the same country, the same culture, whereas it would be more important to go out, to show that we are not only meant for those who have another culture, another language, but we are meant to be salt and light in this society of Sweden. And some parishes have succeeded to be a more evangelizing church. So we see in some parishes there are conversions to the Catholic Church, but not in so many parishes. And especially in the university cities, as Lund, Uppsala, Linköping, there are a growing number of conversions. But there are other parishes where never anyone becomes Catholic. And that's a sign, of course, that we keep to ourselves. We try to find a safe haven, a ghetto. But we have to be more aware of our task to bring the gospel to all those people in Sweden who have no faith. Of course, in dialogue with the other churches, with the other faith communities. But we shouldn't be so afraid to be witnesses in the society of Sweden. And then we see that there will always be people who find their way to the church, as I myself, when I was 20, and it's quite common at that age, students and other turn to the Catholic Church. So I would say that it's a very interesting experience to live in Sweden today, because we see what will be the future in Europe, where Christians are becoming fewer, but where there is also more migrants who can revive the church. We see that in all the big capitals of Europe, that it's mostly the churches, mostly a church of migrants. We see it in Berlin, we see it in Hamburg, even in Paris, in London, that those who come from other countries can vitalize the internal life of our churches. And that's why our church is always open to migration. The Catholic Church has grown thanks to thousands of migrants who have come here. Now, unfortunately, the policy is changing, and it will become more difficult for people to come here, even for priests. So now we are a bit worried that we cannot receive priests from outside the EU because the authorities want us to pay a very high salary, and we cannot afford that. So we always have our challenges, but we also have a sense of hope that Christianity is becoming more alive in Sweden. And we see also that the ecumenical dialogue has become very interesting. A few weeks ago, I was in the United States, invited to the Catholic University of America, together with a Lutheran bishop who had published a book called Martin and Therese. She compared Therese of Lisieux and Martin Luther. A very strange comparison, but still there was something in common. And we had a meeting with the official dialogue commission between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church in the United States. And they were very surprised But in Sweden, we see that in the Lutheran churches, there are so many people who follow the Ignatians' spiritual exercises, who follow St. Bridget, who are interested in St. Francis, who read Carmelite literature. And they love the Orthodox tradition. So we see that in this field of spirituality, there is a real communion. Because I think in a very secular and materialistic society, we need a lot of spiritual nourishment in order to survive. And that's the same for all churches. If we cannot offer and give a deep spiritual nourishment to our Christians, they will disappear. And that's the common challenge for all the churches. And that's why we have to keep on our dialogue. We have differences on dogmatical and ethical questions. That's very true. But if we start on the level of spirituality, we can come closer to each other. And we can also work together on the social issues of our society. For instance, the question of migration, integration, and so forth. So I think there are many hopeful signs. And for our Catholic Church, it has been a tremendous development during the last, I would say, 30 years. Maybe it started with the visit of Pope John Paul II, because that made an impact on the society of Sweden. I remember there was an old Protestant lady who said, "Now I know that the Pope is Christian." And that was a very important thing to say in those days in Sweden, that the Pope somehow had become a symbol of unity for the Christians. And that's what I always hear from so many non-Catholics, that we look upon the Pope as a symbol for all of us. Some say our Pope. So there are very hopeful signs on that level. At the same time, there are great challenges, because the secular atmosphere is very strong, and now our young people are threatened by criminality, by drugs, and so many other challenges in our suburbs of Sweden. But hopefully we confide in God's grace so that the Church can continue to develop its presence in Sweden, and that we can also try to promote Christian unity, that we can promote a society that is more open to the religious values, for the dignity of human life, for the presence of migrants, and so forth. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to give a little insight into our religious situation in Sweden. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence, for this very interesting dive into the realities of the state of the Church in Sweden. So it was very, very, very interesting. We will now hear a presentation about somehow Nordic roots of Ukrainian Orthodoxy, if I may say so, by Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun, Professor of Political Ecclesiology at St. Ignatius Theological Academy in Sweden, and Senior Lecturer at the Stockholm School of Theology. He has also chaired the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Department of External Relations. The floor is yours, Father.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, I should say I feel really at home here for a number of reasons. I'm going to explain why it is so. It's not just a vague statement. I mean it. And I also want to say that last time I was here, it was by the invitation of the Lutheran Church, the Diocese of Visby. I really enjoyed being here. I was invited as, several months after the war in Ukraine escalated, and I was invited to present on that war, for this opportunity I was really grateful to the diocese, and I think we had a very good conversation. But I should confess that for the first time, after several visits to Gotland, I visited this museum, this place, this particular hall. I was just mind smashed, really impressed by these stones and by the testimonies about this unique place, this unique island. It's really an ecumenical island. It's really an island, an island where different traditions and cultures met from the very beginning. It was like a frontier of several cultures, including, of course, the Nordic culture, or we could call it civilization, also the Eastern Roman civilization, and the Western civilization, Latin, or you name what it was. Gotland was like a center or an epicenter of a milieu, of an area where all those three elements mixed up, blended together. And well, the place I come from, Ukraine, was the same place. It belonged to the same area, to the same milieu, because Christianity was brought to Ukraine, what is now called Ukraine. At that time it was called Rus, the state of Rus. It was brought in a similar way as it had been brought here to this island, with some important input from the Nordic countries, especially Vikings, or what we call now Vikings. Of course, they did not call themselves Vikings. Byzantines, of course, they did not call themselves Byzantines. They called themselves Romans, Romei, even though they spoke Greek. And with a constant interaction with the West. So it's the same place. That's why I feel I'm at home, because it's if I were in Kiev, somewhere close at the square to St. Sophia, the kind of main historical cathedral of Kiev, which I found a resemblance of here at St. Lars Church, St. Lars Church here, which was really built in this style of the Byzantine-ish Rus style. And even speaking canonically, I just realized today that that church, established apparently by the traders from Novgorod, canonically speaking, that church, through the metropolis of Novgorod, belonged to the metropolis of Kiev, which really covered this huge area of Rus, and which belonged in its way, in its turn, to the ecumenical patriarchy. So it was like a triple hierarchy: metropolis of Novgorod, metropolis of Kiev, and then the patriarchate of Constantinople. So this community apparently, for some time at least, belonged to that structure. And it was completely accepted, tolerated on this island. So this island was really, from the beginning, ecumenical, and it continues to be so. What I'd like to focus particularly in my presentation today, which is going to be projected, it's another ecumenical undertaking. It's a mission that I just came from. I'm Ukrainian, as it was mentioned, and a week ago I was still in Ukraine. I came to Europe. I was left to leave my country, which is always a challenge. You know, the males are not allowed to leave the country. I had a special permission specifically for this conference to leave the country. And before I left my country, I visited several places like the front lines. I had a chance to visit the southern front line and the eastern front line on the, now everyone knows Donbass, so it's Donbass that I went to. And we had an ecumenical mission indeed there. It had three elements. First, personally, Pope Francis. He was really a part of this mission. He is in touch with some people who are evangelicals, Ukrainian evangelicals, I would say Pentecostals. So he has developed a kind of confidence in those people, and he helps them in different ways with encouragement, prayer, blessing, and money sometimes, in cash. I should probably disclose it. So he gives them money, he gives them blessing, encouragement, and they come to Ukraine, and they then use the facilities, humanitarian facilities across the front line to help those who are in need. They are mostly soldiers who fight, and they're civilians. There are quite a few civilians remaining in those areas. So I joined. I was kind of blessed to join that group of evangelicals who act on behalf of the Pope Francis, with some synergy from the local Catholic dioceses, and me representing the Orthodox as a kind of volunteer. So I'm going to share with you this experience in a similar way, if you want me to draw this parallel further, that the merchants from Rus would come to Gotland centuries ago and would share their experience. That's how Christianity was brought here. That's how the exchanges happened on this island. So I just continue what our predecessors, common predecessors, did centuries ago: exchanging, sharing in faith, and bringing up our concerns and joys. So that's what I'm going to do, and I hope it will work, because it's really tricky, and I'm amazed by the technology. So His Eminence mentioned the youth days in Lisbon. Actually, a big group of Russian, excuse me, not Russian, Ukrainian youth. The Russian youth came up later, and there was kind of a big discussion about how the Pope addressed the Russian group through Zoom. But in Lisbon, a Ukrainian group came over, and they were received by the Pope, and the reception was really warm. And it was really amazing how the Pope expressed again and again his support, his empathy, his sympathy with the Ukrainian cause. There is a video, but I think I have to skip it because it's not broadcast. Yemenes, I can show you on my iPad. So this is the kind of Pope visiting, receiving the Ukrainian children. The Ukrainian children are mostly those who have suffered from the war. They've either lost their parents, or they've been abused and mistreated in the front line. So this is the group that, oops, excuse me, I'm too fast. The group that visited the Pope. These are my buddies. One is the evangelical pastor, Gennady Mokhnenko. He's from Mariupol, and he had adopted 36 children, in addition to 4 children of his own. And they were forced to leave Mariupol. He had to evacuate his family, big family, to Zaporizhia. So we went to Zaporizhia. That is him with the Pope, and there are guys who actually they're kind of the confidants of the Pope. And this you see on the picture, it's the photo of the theater of Mariupol, where a lot of civilians were hiding and were bombarded and buried alive in the basement. That's our mission with the same guys to Zaporizhia. And we also were helped by the local diocese, Catholic diocese. Next to me, you can see the local bishop, the Catholic bishop, who is doing a tremendous work. That's a humanitarian hub. It's actually evangelical. It's run by the evangelicals, but it is facilitated, helped by other traditions and groups. That's how we actually went to the front line. We hit a road. It was a bit dangerous. There's a video, but probably it will not show. So we had to run really like a bullet, because it's open to the Russian artillery and drones. The drones are the most dangerous things, and there are mines on the both sides of the road. So we had to be really fast. And we first visited the Ukrainian positions. This is a Paladin. It's an American tank. So we went inside, and we placed this rosarium you see in the center, which was presented personally by the Pope inside this tank. So it was kind of interesting blend. That's inside the Paladin. And well, in addition to helping our military, we brought them like food. They need, well, I should say they need not very healthy things like energetics. That is the most demanded thing in the front line, to drink those, you know, Red Bulls and stuff. Yeah, they asked us to buy them, and we did. But we also helped a local community that is still there. It's a community of elderly people. They lived before the war. They lived in an apartment building, and then that building was facing the Russian positions, and they are facing bombardments all the time. So the mines come to their doorsteps, literally, like every second day or so. But they decided to stay there, so they moved to the basement, and they have been living at the basement since like April or March 2022 for approximately 1.5 years. And that's how they live. You can see on the pictures, that's the entrance to the shelter inside. And the bomb, the day before we arrived there, a Russian mine hit the doorstep of this building. And they are aware that any moment they can be buried there alive. You know, if Russians are more precise, then they would die there. That's how they live. That's their kitchen and storage inside the basement. That's their refectory and sitting room. That's their bedroom. And they are people like from early 70s to the 80s. They decided to stay there, whatever it takes. And that's the condition for those people. Also bedroom. These kind of people live there, like this granny. I want also to show you some pictures from the eastern front line, from the Donbass. That was Zaporizhia, the southern front line, and now it's the eastern front line. That's another evangelical group. Also, it's a kind of a token of synergy between the Catholics, evangelicals, and Orthodox. This humanitarian aid. So we brought these goods to our military troops. This is artillery unit, an artillery unit. We also visited the drone unit and the sniper unit. These are the snipers. I had to blur their faces for the security reasons. And that's how the Pope is getting informed about this mission. He was absolutely happy when he learned. And actually, last time he was informed, updated about this mission was the day before yesterday. Because my friends visited him in the Apostolic Palace, and they informed him about this mission, and he was thrilled. This video is taken by a hidden camera. It's not really an officially approved video. So I'd like to share with you a few more pictures. The destruction that I've witnessed in Ukraine. It's really horrible. I had a chance to visit most places which were destroyed, and like in the vicinity of Kyiv, of course, but there are even worse places in the Donbass area in the south. I've seen places which are worse than Bucha. Everyone knows about Bucha, but like in Izum, for example, there are even more mass graves with even more tortures that people suffered. Now the exhumation happens, and they see, people with their eyes gouged out, with their bones broken, and there is a thorough investigation about those atrocities. They are really inhuman, and the area is completely destroyed. Not a single building stays undamaged or undestroyed there. Every single building is damaged or destroyed completely. Like this one, it's in the same place where this elderly group lives. It's Orihiv. So the elderly people used to come to this humanitarian hub that you can see on the picture. They went there, to wash themselves, for a shower, for hot food, to watch TV, which is a big kind of luxury for them. So 2 days literally before we arrived at that spot, that humanitarian hub was destroyed by 2 Russian air bombs. And that's what remains of this hub. Some of those elderly people died there, and they said to us, we could be there. It was like Sunday, the day of Sunday, and like over a dozen people were killed in this bombardment, and they were the clients, the visitors to this humanitarian hub. That's another place I witnessed. It's in Izum. It's the Kharkiv region, which was occupied and then deoccupied last autumn. And I've seen some places like children's facility, like this playground, which stands next to a house which was bombarded, destroyed by a Russian air bomb. I just walked in the first apartment that I saw. I just went to what remains of that building, and the first thing I saw, it was very random. It was not like, pre-scheduled or pre-programmed. I just walked into the first apartment available, and I saw what you see there. Apparently, children live there. They live there, and they were like trotters, and I don't know what happened to them. Are they surviving? Because over 500 children have been killed in this war, as you know, in Ukraine, and or they just fled the country, as most of them did, and they came to the countries, including Sweden, for which we are absolutely grateful. And we especially, I'd like to use this opportunity to thank also Poland. I know there are people from Poland, many people from Poland. Poland has been really a great host for the refugees. It's really a deep appreciation that we feel in Ukraine to Poland and other countries, to Sweden including. So they apparently left, and hopefully the best scenario, and they are somewhere around here. That's a preschool in Kharkiv. It's another thing. I didn't plan it. We just, randomly stopped over, and I walked into this preschool, as you can see, a kindergarten, and that's what I found inside. These are the boxes for clothes for the children. It's interesting from the names. You understand that it was really a very diverse community. There are some Muslim names, some Russian names, some Ukrainian names of the children who were there, and, well, they've left, well, in the best case. That's what remains of them, of their presence there. I particularly like this picture. I was really impressed by it. A wall hit by a shell and a toy plane approaching it. This is a school. It's in the south of Ukraine. That's what remains of a brand new school, which had been built just before the fully fledged war. Well, monasteries and churches have been destroyed as well. I'll show you a picture, some pictures from a monastery which was destroyed in the Donbas area. It's kind of an outpost of a lavra, a big monastery in the east of Ukraine, Svetohivska Lavra, and they had like outposts here and there, including this one of St. George, and that's what happened to this outpost. It used to be really a beautiful compound. A lot of marble, a lot of precious stone, and it's all gone. That's what remains of this monastery. So what I saw, it was a manifestation of what happens when religion becomes instrumentalized. His Eminence, you were talking about the kind of re-emergence of religion in Europe. In a similar way, religion re-emerged in Russia, because after the decades of atheism, of the militant atheism in Russia, there was a void, a spiritual void, and that void was supposed to be filled up by the church. And indeed, there was a kind of revival of the church in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But this revival went some wrong way, it seems. Because instead of filling the void which had been left by the Soviet kind of communist ideology, it was refilled with not really spirituality and religion per se properly, but a kind of mixture of ideology and religion. a kind of what has been identified by the sociologists of religion as civil religion or political religion. Religion being politicized or politics being religionized. It's a blend of political slogans or political ideas wrapped into religious rhetoric. It's a mixture of nationalism, of an ideology of exceptionalism. It's a mixture with admixture of messianism, the idea that we have a special mission for, in this world to save this world from the decadence, from itself. So many Russians believe that's what they do, that they are on a mission from God, to save Europe from secularism. They're fighting secularism, they say. At the same time, it's really a very interesting religiosity which can be identified as dualistic, as Manichaean, as seeing the world in black and white. And of course, Russia is the white side of this picture, and the rest of the world is the black side. It's an example of re-sacralization of a space, of desecularization, which went wrong. Some scholars identify what is happening in Russia as a post-secularism. Post-secularity is a phenomenon which is observed in Europe. Primarily, it was identified by people like Jürgen Habermas 20 years ago. He himself was a kind of convinced secularist. At the same time, he acknowledged that religion has a space in Europe, and he welcomed religion to the public space in Europe. And he called it post-secularism. And after that, many scholars have elaborated on this idea of post-secularism. And what is happening in Russia can be identified also as a post-secularism, but it's a post-secularism that went wrong. That claims that when the church claims a public space for itself, and that is what is happening in Russia. The Russian church struggles to claim back the central spot in the public space in post-Soviet Russia for itself, but it does it at any price. And it doesn't count, the compromises, moral compromises for that. Of course, the political authorities in Russia, the Kremlin, is ready to offer this special public space for the Russian church, but at a price. The price is to support the regime, to support the ideas that this regime wants to propel in the Russian society, and the church seems to be ready to accept this price and has accepted this price. So as a result, we see in Russia, what we see in Russia is really a worst scenario of rejoining the church and the state, the worst scenario of reoccupying of the public space by the church, and the worst scenario of what we call in the East Symphonia. Of course, it has to do with our own tradition of Symphonia as a kind of special relationship between the church and the state. That goes back to Byzantium, that goes back to the time when, Constantine accepted Christianity, and his successors, like Constantius II and Theodosius and others, forged this symphonia. And that's what they try to rebuild in Russia, a sort of symphonia between the church and the state, which went wrong, as I said again. They say that they come they are on a mission. And it demonstrates that when a group of people, particularly a strong, enforced, empowered group of people, empowered by the state, empowered by the ideas, by the ideologies, think that they are on a mission, they feel that they are absolved to do any sort of atrocity they can. I explained those atrocities that I saw in Bucha, in Izum, with all those mass graves, including, they were exhumated the bodies, and they placed, they reburied the bodies in the cemeteries, and you could see rows, literally, of all the generation of the same family, granny, parents, and trotters in the same row being buried. And you wonder, what kind of human being can do this? And then I realized those people who believe that they are on a mission, and they believe they are on a mission from God, to save the world from itself. This creates this feeling of exceptionalism. We are exempted from the common human morality because we have, a super task, a super mission to accomplish. That's how I explain those atrocities. They believe that they are on a mission to save, the values that stem from religion. They call it the traditional values. They say, we come here to protect the family values. I firmly believe in family values. I believe they are important, but I also saw how they can be abused. They come and kill in the name of the traditional family values. They destroy families. Almost every single family in Ukraine has been damaged as a result. I take my own family. My brother is in the front line. My niece, she is 13 or 14 years old. She doesn't see her father. They came to Sweden first in the beginning of the war, and then they left back to Ukraine. And it's a broken family in a sense. They try to be together, to stick together. But when you have this family divided, it's not easy. And the same applies to most other Ukrainian families. When males, as I said, are not allowed to leave the country, so wives and children go to Europe for shelter, and they don't see each other for months. And so many families have been destroyed as a result because, well, if you don't see your spouse, well, eventually you go your own way, and he goes his own way, Sometimes families are destroyed literally. I mean, husbands are killed in the front line, and small children are left orphans. There are like thousands of them because we don't really know how many our soldiers have been killed. It's like a secret because the number is high. So it would be really discouraging. And we have really like dozens of thousands orphans nowadays in Ukraine. And these orphans exist in the name of those family values. So in this case, we are dealing with really an abuse of very important things, important for us in the Western societies. We struggle to resacralize, public space. We struggle to overcome secularism. We struggle to fight for family values. The Russians do the same. And they abuse them. So it means it's a lesson for us. We need to be really careful not to allow this sort of abuse to happen. We need to do our work. It's important what we are doing, but we need to do it in a wise way. That's my kind of conclusion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Father. And to come back to the Cardinal's words, these hopeful signs for the whole of Europe about, this return of the Catholic faith in northern countries, we should also mention the fact that at the same time it is accompanied by other symptoms observed across the whole continent, and which, Professor Chantal Del Sol has been warning about in recent years. Excuse me, namely the massive reintroduction of pagan symbols and principles into our current understanding of today's society. In her recent book, in particular, La fin de la chrétienté, The End of Christendom, Chantal Del Sol postulates that we are witnessing a complete normative and philosophical inversion that is leading to the downfall of Christian civilization, making it essential to find new ways to exist. She also warns against a tendency within the current church to blend in with the new dominant trends and thinking or religions, so as not to disappear from the scene and somehow be part of the winning team, which I think is a very, very insightful argument. And as an example, she quotes often the theme of ecology, which the church often tends to address with a quite pantheistic approach. So we thought it was important to introduce this important topic in our debate, in today's discussions, and which also historian David Engels will then echo later tonight, suggesting in particular the ways in order the ways to resist this trend, thanks to the great British writer Tolkien, and intelligently face these new forms of paganism that are gradually taking hold of our society. So unfortunately, Mrs. Del Sol couldn't make the trip to Gotland this time, but she was kind enough to join us virtually from Paris. Is she on? Yes. Okay, they are just doing the technical arrangement for that. And so, yeah, then it will be followed by a break after 30 minutes, so that everyone can get refreshments. And then, yes, we have 2 more lectures tonight. And is she... Okay, she will appear here. Oh, wonderful. So it's very interesting to see how all our countries are connected by the universality of our Christian history, and nowadays we can talk to each other through this forum to really understand and find creative ways to build a future with the current challenges that we are facing, and we can definitely see that a lot of challenges are the same as those that we witnessed in the past. So. Chantal Del Sol is not yet online. We are having some technical issues, so I'm very sorry to keep you waiting. So yes, in the meantime, I was, commenting on the opportunity to have this kind of forums more often, international forums, in order to bring on the table very, very different perspective. And I think that's what we're trying to do tonight, and we'll do that again tomorrow. We'll also take questions from the audience, from people from different nationalities facing different issues, facing different challenges. And yes, I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity, and I hope it's not the last Gotland Forum, although it can be also held somewhere else in Europe. But I like the concept of a Gotland Forum. It can keep the same name in the future because it was founded here, and I hope we will have more opportunities to bring together church leaders from very different walks of life, and that can bring on the table very, very interesting theories in order to make us resist that trend and the de-Christianization in Europe. So after the... Okay, so we're really having technical issues, so my apologies. I think we will take the break now in order to fix that. So I'm inviting you all to have some refreshments, and we will be back in 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Hello, hello. Hello, dear guests, please. We would like to continue our session in GOTLAND Forum, please. Please. Yeah. Please, we have to close the cough break now, unfortunately, because we are getting in the air in 3 minutes. Please, I would like to invite you to take back your seats so we can continue this wonderful GOTLAND Forum. Please, Your Eminency and our guests.
Okay.
Let's start. 2 minutes. 2 minutes to start broadcasting.
Yes, we are sorry we have to shorten the coffee break for tonight because Professor Del Sol is waiting for us now. The technical issues are solved, so we will be able to resume our conversations. She's connected. We see her on the wall. So here we are. Thank you very much, Professor Del Sol, for being with us at that time of the day. Very much.
Thank you.
So the floor is yours. I introduced you already, and we are all eagerly awaiting your speech. Thank you very much, Professor Del Sol.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Solene. Thank you, David. and everybody. I begin?
Yes, please.
So, you asked me to speak about paganism. So, after the revolutionary season, while the immemorial religion fled and slipped away, while their faith wavered, Europeans were not satisfied with the cult of the supreme being. They do not become atheists either, a very improbable solution reserved for a few strong minds. We will not prevent humans from seeking to give meaning to their lives and their deaths. The disaffection with Judeo-Christian monotheism then leads to new appetites for Eastern religion. I don't hear very much. There is an echo. No. It is for okay. The scale of the querelle du panthéisme at the beginning of the 19th century already reflects the painful questions that arose about the Enlightenment's abandonment of traditional religion. Were we going to fall into nihilism? It is in the famous letter to Fichte that Jacobi uses this term for the first time. Jacobi draws the consequences of Enlightenment rationalism and shows or demonstrates that it leads to atheism, that is to say, pantheism. Spinoza then represents both the scapegoat and a sort of mascot. In any case, it is the premise of what is happening to us today. If the rationalism of the Enlightenment is dangerous and dries up everything, as Jacobi says, it is not exactly because it deviates from any religious spirit, from this salto mortale or leap into the unknown, which creates beauty of God's choice. Not, no, if enlightenment, rationalism is dangerous, it is because it simultaneously rejects religion, faith, and the ancient traditions and prejudices on which a society is based. Many people do not need God to live, prosper, and do well. Their morals, their ethics are based on customs, on traditions, which carry their moral convictions. The rationalism of enlightenment erases everything simultaneously, traditions and faith. It leaves only dry and virgin land where grass no longer grows back. Thus, romantic currents, which will develop, particularly German ones, ready to rediscover the stories and myths since faith has gone. It was through its refusal of the rationality of the Enlightenment that post-revolutionary Germany was attracted to Asian thoughts. Heine writes, I quote, pantheism is the hidden religion of Germany. Asian pantheism fascinates minds tired of dry reason in the 19th. He was convinced that Indian wisdom was the future of Europe. I quote, our religions do not take and will not take root in India. The primitive wisdom of the human race will not allow itself to be diverted from its course for an adventure arriving in Galilee. No, but Indian wisdom will still flow back to Europe and will fundamentally transform our knowledge and our thinking. In contemporary times, and since the 19th century, the influence of Asian thoughts has been decisive among Westerners. Today, Lévi-Strauss, regarding Buddhist respect for all living beings, calls, for example, I quote, the Buddhist Far East remains the repository which we would like humanity as a whole to continue or learn to get inspired. Philippe Descola, a French, at the beginning of Nature and Culture, calls for moving away from dualism and, I quote, setting in motion a monist anthropology. The converging examples are countless. Indicates an influence of Asia on the old continent, where Buddhist centers are being created today. Certainly, the disaffection of Catholicism after almost 2 millennia of reign causes an unbearable vacancy which seeks to be filled by new beliefs. It is human. But even more, Asian religious offerings correspond to contemporary aspirations. They are not attached to the notion of truth. Hence, their syncretism, which falsely appears to Westerners as tolerance. They attach essential value to nature and all living things, which is an essential condition of membership for ecology. They brandish no God, no dogma, no obligation. The faithful enter there to take what they want and leave the rest. The effort to eliminate suffering resembles personal development sessions, and this is what our contemporaries come to seek in religious after the end of Christianity. There is certainly a contradiction between the impermanence of the self among Buddhists and personal development, but the new followers are not looking that far. They are looking for a practice rather than a theory. In this regard, the two main prophets of our time are Tocqueville and Nietzsche, but the prophecies are innumerable. In a very brief chapter of Democracy in America, Tocqueville notes the success of pantheism in the West at this time and affirms that this is not a passing fashion, but a lasting process. Indeed, pantheism responds to the general requirements of the moment and mainly to the main requirement of the democratic era, egalitarianism. Pantheism is the religious domain, democracy in the political domain. Both consider humanity as a great mass whose individuals are equal and weak atoms. There are no more great personalities. Tocqueville wrote this terrible text, I quote, "Such a system, pantheism, also it destroys human individuality, or rather because it destroys it, will have secret charms for men who live in democracy." Bergson analyzed two types of morality: the most evolved, open morality, established on the basis of heroic personalities serving as models. The most evolved morality, because, I quote, "the truth is that here we have to go through heroism to arrive at love." The model can be Jesus or Buddha in what we will call today secondary religions. If we take Bergson's categories again, the appeal of pantheism today is a return to closed moralities without heroes, for which all are equal and follow the law of the world. Nietzsche has foreseen the same evolution when he wrote, I quote, European China, with a gentle Buddhist Christian belief, and in practice, an Epicurean savoir-vivre in French. The attraction for pantheistic or cosmotheistic religions unfolds from the slightest decline in monotheistic religion. We know that nature abhors a vacuum. At the start of the 21st century, now, the most established and promising philosophical movement is a form of cosmotheism linked to the defense of nature. We can speak equally of pantheism or polytheism. Our Western contemporaries no longer believe in an afterlife or in transcendence. And if they imagine another world in which to live one day, it is a distant planet where we should reach by supersonic rocket. The meaning of life must therefore be found in this life itself and not above it, where there is nothing. The sacred is found here, in the landscape, in the life of the earth, and in humans themselves. At the turn of the 20th century and 21st century, we changed paradigm by making a new choice for understanding the world. An ontological inversion has occurred. It is about new ontological preferences and the appearance in the West of new paradigms, a monist anthropology, which is close to ancient animism. The worldview of Christianity therefore appears as one among others, a particular ontological choice, which may no longer be appropriate with the changing times. For today's ecologism, there is no longer an essential separation between man and other living things, nor between man and all nature, which he simply inhabits without dominating it with any superiority. Paganism, cosmic, responds to the concerns of ecology. The postmodern moment is concerned with space more than time, because it has abandoned the great temporal hopes. In monotheism, man feels foreign in this immanent world and aspires to the other world. This is, for example, what Nietzsche criticized Christian for. For the monotheist, this world is only a state. For the cosmotheist, it is a home. The postmodern mind is tired of living in a state. He needs a home of its own, complete in its meanings. He becomes a cosmotheist again because he wants to reintegrate this world as a full citizen and no longer as this domiciliated foreigner, I quote, this Christian described by the anonymous person in the letter to Diognetus. He now wants to be at case, to be at ease in the immanent world of which he is an integral part, without needing to dream or wave or hope for another world which leaves him separated from himself. He wants to live in a self-sufficient world which contains its meanings within itself. In other words, an enchanted world, whose enchantment is found within and not in a distressing and hypothetical beyond. Thus, cosmotheism would be part of the current term of this historical process. There would have been the reign of God, then the reign of man, finally the reign of nature. Otherwise, this term is at the same time a return to the origin, because before the reign of God, there was already the reign of nature. Obviously, we will not be animists in the same way as our distant ancestors, because our history is not theirs. But we should at least make the effort of what Alain Caillé calls, I quote, methodological animism. Here again, the negative purpose is put forward. The goal is to get rid of Western hubris, and for that, we must get rid of the superiority of man. Ecology today is a religion, a belief. Belief, not that the current ecological problem should not be considered scientifically problem, but because these scientific certainties concerning the climate and ecology produce irrational convictions and certainties. In reality, religious beliefs endowed with all the manifestations of religion. Today, ecology has become a liturgy. It is impossible to omit the question, one way or another, in any speech or fragment of speech. It is a catechism. We teach it to children from nursery school and repetitively to help them acquire good habits of thinking and acting. It is a consensual dogma. Anyone who asks question about it, who raises the slightest doubt, is considered crazy or evil. But above all, and this is a clear sign of a vigorous belief, and certainly not of a rational science, passion for nature makes one accept everything that was rejected by all-powerful individualism. Personal responsibility, debt imposed on descendants, duties towards the community. It is therefore in the name of this immanent and pagan religion that we reintegrate all the essential dimensions of existence which previously were taken into account and cultivated by Christianity. I will go to the conclusion. We have an entire Christian tradition of defense of nature, from Saint Francis or Saint Hildegard of Bingen to today Gustave Thiebaud, for example, in France. In this case, nature is considered a divine creation and protected as such. The defense of nature is part of faith in transcendence and a humanism that places man at the center. We then speak of environment, and nature cannot be divinized, since the divine is elsewhere. While Christianity has faded and transcendence with it, it is inevitable that the sacred will resurface in one form or another. It must be remembered that the sacralization of nature constitutes the most primitive and rudimentary religion base, the one which comes, so to speak, on its own, and in any human society. Even as the defense of the environment is established as a pressing and obvious duty, nature is then seen sacred. That is to say, put aside, established above, made inviolable. The new ecological religion is a form of postmodern pantheism. Nature becomes the object of a cult, more or less proven. Mother Earth becomes a kind of pagan goddess, and not only among Bolivian indigenous people, but also among Europeans. So much so that Pope Francis speaks today of, I quote, our Mother Earth, in a Christian sense, of course, but leaving open the ambiguity which allows the link with contemporary beliefs. Our contemporaries defend nature distorted by man in all its forms, but they also embrace the trees. We are at a stage where, in the vast field opened by the erasure of Christianity, new beliefs hesitate and tremble. And above all, pantheism, which transforms the defense of the environment into religion. Thank you for listening to me.
But he will also focus on these kind of new forms of neo-paganism and the ways that Tolkien can help us face these very big challenges for today's society. Thank you very much, Professor. David Engel is a Belgian historian, research professor at the Institute Zagodni in Poznan, sorry for the pronunciation, and holder of the chair of history of the Roman world at the Université Libre of Bruxelles in Belgium. Thank you very much, Professor. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Your Eminence, dear Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, first, please let me thank you for this generous and kind invitation to Gotland. My first immediate experience of Sweden, as I have to confess, and a real eye-opener, not only for the history of the Nordic countries, but also for how it feels to partake in this unique landscape and world feeling. Superficially, the inculturation of Christianity in the early Germanic societies may seem to be a purely theoretical, antiquarian question. Do we not all happily live in a post-Christian society where notions of religious or ethnic identities have long since disappeared to the profit of enlightened, inclusive, tolerant, multicultural and gender-diverse values, especially in the Scandinavian countries? And yet, specifically countries such as Sweden, Denmark and Norway should know better. On the one hand, because the numerous crises they are facing right now, especially though not exclusively the migration issue, demonstrate that the values of modernity are far from being truly attractive or really inclusive. To the contrary, it seems obvious that the more enlightened the West seems to become, the less the migrants seem to respect it or to adapt, integrate or assimilate, as already His Eminence, the Cardinal, so rightly stressed. On the other hand, because Scandinavia is also facing an inner identity crisis. Christianity has largely appeared, without a doubt, but this does not mean that religious urges have been eradicated. To the contrary, the empty altars have become home to numerous demons, as was already announced many decades ago by Ernst Jünger, who converted, by the way, to Catholicism on his deathbed. Not only esotericism or the climate sects, but also and above all, neo-paganism are on the rise everywhere. And though the latter phenomenon is statistically still rather insignificant, it is representative of a profound unease with the modern world, an unease that seems especially felt by young people in search of their true historic identity, as Chantal Del Sol also explained it so well. Determining the link between Germanic identity and Christian spirituality, while including into this equation the part we should attribute to the Jewish and the Greco-Roman roots of our heritage, is thus an essential task for constructing our future. Not only in order to define, or rather reconstruct, our own identity and create a framework capable of defending our interests as well as integrating potential newcomers. There are also countless other reasons why, even outside of all practical considerations, it should be our duty to remain faithful to the heritage and, most of all, the specific approach towards transcendent left to us by our ancestors. In the following, I would like to approach this question by taking a starting point the works of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, whom I consider as one of the most important and influential vectors in the transmission of Germanic culture and Christian transcendence from the earliest ages to our own era. And it is probably not a coincidence if currently there is a true battle raging around the interpretation and reappropriation of Tolkien's work. Originally begun with the playful idea of creating, out of speculative etymologies and invented languages, a mythology for England, which had lost its actual Anglo-Saxon identity after the Norman conquest, Tolkien's work quickly evolved into an imposing secondary creation, which was deeply anchored in his Catholic faith and raised many of its authors' personal questions to an archetypal mythological level where they would be symbolically answered. Tolkien's work, because of its complexity and traditionalism, is a veritable treasure trove for today's conservative. And it is astonishing that the opportunities arising from this have not even begun to be recognized, especially in view of Tolkien's immense popularity with young people. God as a historical actor, good and evil as non-negotiable values, honor, loyalty, and duty as the highest virtues, clear social hierarchies, gender roles dependent on natural law, insight into the ultimate futility of human hybris, beauty and suffering as mutually dependent values, deep mistrust in all political institutions, coupled with a hope for the return of the king. Tolkien's world of thought, if we look at it closely, actually stands for everything that is considered politically incorrect in the 21st century, and could be the ideal bridge between the vague longings of modern youth and the truth of Christian tradition. The development of the last decades has shown that a society without a transcendent foundation is doomed to degeneration and failure sooner or later. Just as in Tolkien's mythical history cycles, hybris and turning away from divine law always lead to collapse, be it the crimes of the Noldor in Beleriand, the fall of Numenor, or the slow decline of Arnor and Gondor. What many critical thinkers have suspected since the 18th century, without being taken seriously by the progress intoxicated masses, has finally come to pass. After even the last remnants of decency, honor, loyalty, family feeling, and conscience have evaporated after a tough struggle, the consequence of the intellectual dictatorship of the alleged universal rights that have taken their place are coming clearly before our eyes. From respect for human dignity is derived the legitimacy of abortion until the day of birth. From democracy, a bureaucratic monstrosity such as the EU. From equality, a dual system in which all problems are attributed to the allegedly uninformed masses, not the elites. From the rule of law, a cynical legal positivism. From non-discrimination, the hunt for old white men. From gender equality, the idealization of the Muslim veil as victory of feminism. From tolerance, the excuse for the formation of parallel society and moral decay. From solidarity, the bailout for the big banks, and so forth. Tolkien already explicitly stated that Morgoth's orcs and Saruman's war machines were nothing more than symbols of a collectivist and mechanist view of the world that arose from originally good intentions, as he first experienced it during the First World War and then during the rise of totalitarian structures, not only in the fascist and communist states, but quite explicitly also in the free world, as Tolkien explicitly mentioned in the introduction to the second edition of The Lord of the Rings, when he wrote, I quote, "Had the Second World War inspired or predetermined the development of the legend, the ring would surely have been willingly taken up and used against Sauron." End of quote. Therefore, all those who believe that true conservatism means a mere return to the supposedly good old days of, let's say, the 1980s, are also mistaken, merely because the disastrous consequences of left liberalism, already firmly established at that time, had not yet unfolded their full implications. What is needed is a complete questioning of the foundations of the modern world and a return to its ultimate transcendent origins. For where man becomes the measure of all things, he who defines humanity becomes the unchallenged autocrat. And all this without having to change one iota of the external form of the law, since the real power has long since shifted to the interpretation and not the formulation of the law. For where only the mechanics of the individual parts, but not the transcendent meaning of the whole, come into view, tyranny and catastrophe must ensue, as Tolkien also vividly described using the example of those all too inquisitive people like Fëanor, Sauron or Saruman, whose Promethean hybris ultimately led to pure evil. For, quotation, "he who breaks something to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom." End of quote, as Gandalf already knew. More than ever then, we need a new reconnection of our value system to transcendence as the ultimate and unchanging point of reference and legitimation of every action, a symbolic return of the king. But admittedly, who would even be able to gauge the full extent of that degeneration today, since parents, schools, media and politics have brought about an almost complete erosion of any natural sense of decency and dignity in most people, as well as a fundamental break with the traditions of the collective past. Even Tolkien was extremely skeptical about the human capacity to retain moral probity for longer periods of time without external pressure. And it was no accident that he abandoned his sequel draft of The Lord of the Rings, A New Shadow, after only a few pages, as it quickly became a depressing dystopia. And yet, man's innate need for transcendent anchoring of his life can never be completely suppressed and is always reflected in a subliminal longing for order and meaning. And, where such should not be attainable, this subconscious desire to destroy the present society in order to build a perhaps more archaic but healthier structure on its ruins, as is clearly shown by the preoccupying fascination of modernity with zombie, fallout, or other apocalyptic scenarios, the reawakened interest in magical practices, and the longing for pre-modern social models from Tolkien over Sapkowski to George R.R. Martin and, in a sense, even Frank Herbert. This longing is both a danger and an opportunity for Europe's conservative forces. an opportunity, because this longing has enormous political potential, a danger, because this longing is currently being steered by the media and consumer society in a direction that could run counter to many basic ideas of the Western Christian tradition. This is all the worse because large sections of conservatives now disagree about what should be considered the real core of that urgent, transcendent reconnection of Western society. Tolkien's answer to this question is clear. Only a return to the Christian tradition, not in its present dwindling state, but in its actual heroic greatness, can lead Western society back towards its actual destiny. But what kind of Christianity? For at least 1,000 years, Christianity, in combination with local customs and the last remnants of Roman tradition, was the inescapable point of reference for every social order in the post-Roman Western world. This does not mean that Christianity gave a complete set of answers to every question, since the Christian tradition was also subject to a dynamic development. Nevertheless, there was a willingness to clarify all problems from the perspective of an unchanging image of God and man, and on the basis of a multi-layered corpus of oral traditions, biblical text, and canonical interpretations, thereby presupposing the categories of good and evil as absolute and founded on an otherworldly basis, and not, as is the case today, on the results of social negotiation. Tolkien already pointed out the difficulties that arise when one deviates from the right path and makes lazy compromises. At the beginning, there's ambition disguised as idealism, at the end, pure devilry. And opportunistic minds, which in the midst of this great confusion brand the last upright people as troublemakers, are always found in abundance. Those times are now over, at least since 1789, and even the last remnants of a merely cultural Christianity are now succumbing to the double onslaught of left liberalism, the culture of death, and Islamism. But it is not only the disappearance of Christianity from the communal life and the hearts of the people that poses a long-term threat to the stability of our society. Even worse is the opportunistic adaptation of what remains of Christian institutions to the current zeitgeist. Just as in Tolkien's world, betrayal ultimately always undermines even the most venerable institutions, be it the Kingdom of Gondolin, the Stewardship of Gondor, or the presidency over the White Council. Christianity today has become a community that has long since abandoned the reference to the Christian God, as well as the philosophical depth of the Trinitarian dogma, the proud claim to absolute truth, the courage to heroically defend one's own creed and to hate sin, the insight that salvation is always only the result of divine grace, and not least the pride in one's own past. All these characteristics have, to a large scale, been replaced by the reduction of spiritual complexity to the platitude of Kant's moral imperative, the conscious relativization of one's own faith, actual impotence disguised as pacifism, and much more. The strumming of guitars instead of Gregorian chant, brutalist concrete huts instead of Gothic cathedrals, politically correct zeitgeist instead of courageous timelessness, pastoral tribalism instead of millennia-old rituals. This is what most of the churches of the 21st century have become, as already Tolkien feared, for whom already the Second Vatican Council was an enormous problem and who rigidly continued to use Latin in his own religious practice. No wonder then that many conservatives have turned away from the Christian tradition and either see it as a kind of pre-modern propedeutics to the present left-liberal welfare state, or misunderstand the Christian message as the actual cause of globalization, self-hatred, or over-alienation because of its universality, its critical view of man, and its commandment of love. While those post-Christian, left-liberal conservatives are only afraid of the consequences, but not of the actual foundations of the current decay, the non-Christian conservatives at least feel the need for a new transcendental foundation of our society, but cease to search it within Christianity and turn to other forms of spirituality, mostly pseudo-Germanic neo-paganism. For many of these seekers, in quest of their identity, Tolkien's heroic Middle-earth, with its apparent immanence of the divine, represents an ideal projection surface for neo-pagan longings. a flagrant misunderstanding that completely fails to recognize the fundamentally Christian dimension of Tolkien's secondary creation. For Middle-earth is only pagan at first sight. The Valar, to whose honor even the late Gondorians in The Lord of the Rings silently raise their cup, are only subordinate, angelic figures who owe their power solely to the creator god. As does Morgoth, their diabolical antagonist, who nevertheless only unwittingly contributes to the fulfillment of good. Characteristic for the spiritual development of Middle-earth, and in a symbolic way also for that of the real cosmos, is also the increasing withdrawal of the supernatural from the real world. While the Valar initially controlled the fate of the world in the flesh, they then withdrew into the enclosed Valinor, which was then completely removed from the earth and finally only connected to this world through messengers, sorcerers, and finally the Son of God. Similarly, evil, after its powers have been fully absorbed into the material world through the creation of various monsters and then the spreading of lies, it matters little that first Morgoth, then Sauron leave the actual world. The struggle between good and evil has merely shifted from the physical to the spiritual plane in accordance with the Creator God's plan of salvation. It is also shown by the manifold allusions to Christian revelations that pervade Tolkien's work. Thus, paganism is only one stage within a more comprehensive plan of salvation. And if the clear-cut front lines of that heroic age may appear quite attractive from today's perspective, and so much more easy to deal with than the present spiritual war within our souls, a return to such a Germanic past would not only be a perverse regression, but also a betrayal of our salvation mission and, moreover, an undertaking that is not only obviously artificial, but also wrong, problematic, wrong, and even dangerous. Problematic because the deliberate construction of a religion by selectively picking out agreeable elements from the sparse scraps of our tradition is not by chance reminiscent of the formation of those other alternative identities, such as genderism, veganism, New Age, Extinction Rebellion, and whatever, that have splintered our modern world into a variety of artificial and rival parallel societies. The construed return to a fictitious authenticity is therefore no real contribution to overcoming the present problems, but rather only a symptom of our malaise in culture, and is not by chance reminiscence of Denethor's wish to return to the barbaric burial customs of the ancient rulers from the time before a ship ever sailed here from the west. Wrong, because paganism only became a religion when it met Christianity. Before that, it was an unquestioned collection of the most diverse rites and legends, which required no faith but mere action, and which was tied to the experience of nature to such an extent that doubt about the truth of those pagan ideas could not even arise. Only the incomparably more complex, because more philosophical claim to truth of Christianity, together with its complex veterotestamentarian background, gave rise to the problem of faith in the first place, behind which there is no going back from the spiritual horizon of the 21st century. And dangerous because every contact with the divine, if it does not want to remain a mere superficial lifestyle, is at the same time a game with danger. Anyone who enters into honest contact with the divine must also reckon with an answer. And everyone should be aware that such an answer in the pagan context can turn out not only positive but also negative. But even more essential, paganism was abolished by Christianity almost everywhere in Europe more than 1,000 years ago, and the disruptive return to pre-Christian conditions would not only be unnatural, it would also completely misjudge the nature of that abolition. Hegel already explained that the term abolition, Aufhebung, has a threefold meaning. Not only that of a mere negation, but also that of preserving important components of the old in the new. And finally, that of elevating the old element to a higher level. A return to the pagan status quo ante would thus not only be a step backward in every respect, it would also betray the danger of abandoning, together with Christianity, all those central elements of genuine, original paganism that are still alive here, and replacing them in favor of a chimerical, artificial religion derived entirely from contemporary thought, which would paradoxically have less to do with the sensibilities of genuine pagans than what has been preserved of them without interruption in Christianity. Whatever was true, important, and healthy in German paganism has been transcended and thus lives on in Christianity. This is certainly one of the reasons for the fascination of Tolkien's work. For instead of offering mere backward escapism or passing entertainment, as so many fantastic authors do, he has succeeded in designing a world in which the seemingly pagan, that is extra-Christian or pre-Christian elements, are sensibly arranged in relation to the legends of the West, the narrative material of the Old Testament, and most of all, the Christian history of salvation. Thus, despite its apparent strangeness, Middle-earth is an integral part of Western culture, a mythology entirely tailored to our Northwestern European view of the world and of humanity. Loving the world Tolkien created is thus by no means a symptom of escapism, but in reality an indication of the rejection of a culture-destroying counter and underworldly modernity, and an unconscious longing for condensed, even transcendent summary of what it once meant to be a Western man. For Tolkien, two elements seemed to be central to depict the soul of this somehow alternative, recreated inner or transcendent West. On the one hand, his work is permeated by that constant Western Faustian striving that also takes on very concrete forms in Middle-earth in the form of the Hesperialist longing of the elves and the humans for the West, and that culminates in the figure of Earendil, who assumes a hinge function between Middle-earth, the Nordic sagas, and the Christian tradition, as already his name is present as well in the Edda as in the O antiphon of the Advent liturgy in order to refer to the morning star. On the other hand, courageous perseverance in a hopeless position should be mentioned as a further characteristic of Tolkien's image of Western men, a trait that is not only reflected in the Nordic spirit of the Germanic sagas, so important to Tolkien, but is also genuinely Christian. For since man and creation, in Middle-earth as in the West, are afflicted by the stain of evil and the fall from grace, any striving for permanence, knowledge, or beauty is under divine protection, but at the same time doomed to failure, and can only be brought to fulfillment by an act of grace, by divine intervention from outside. The heroic tradition of the Nordic West must therefore have seemed to Tolkien like an anticipation of that Christian thought. So it is no wonder that the two complement rather than contradict each other in Tolkien's secondary creation. It would, of course, go beyond the scope of this short presentation to point out in detail all the pagan customs and world feelings that were also adopted in the real world by the Christianity of late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. And let it be said, in most cases quite voluntarily, if one considers, for example, that those Germanic peoples who inherited the Roman Empire had for the most part already converted to Christianity without being subjected to direct political pressure. The conversion from paganism to Christianity was voluntary and will therefore not have taken place under the auspices of a painful loss of one's own tradition, but rather under that of gaining an additional spiritual dimension. And even though at the beginning paganism and Christianity stood unconnected next to each other, as is clear in the uneasiness of many early heroic sagas revisited by Christian scribes such as Beowulf, which was so important to Tolkien, they grew together, step by step, into a genuine symbiosis and thus created the actual foundations of Western culture as it emerged in the European heartlands since the Carolingian and especially the Ottonian periods. It is only a small but essential step from the pagan to the Christian hero namely that of incorporating the moral dualism between a good and evil that was not yet problematized in Germanic heroic epic poetry. And that was not only morally, but also transcendentally anchored. A deficiency which, by the way, also applied to the Greek literature. While the pre-Christian hero, Nordic or Greek, had the tragic choice between two values mutually exclusive, though generally both of equal legitimacy, leading thus to a manly but tragic fight and generally fate, the Christian hero's fight is anchored in a clearly structured moral universe. For while the behavioral framework of the pre-Christian hero was rooted in tradition and convention, but not in transcendence, if we recall, for example, Antigone or the Nibelungs, the Christian hero's main task is to identify the morally right choice, and his otherworldly reward will not be dedicated to his mere perseverance in outer fight, but to his inner quest for purity. From the Christianization of the legends around the Celtic King Arthur and his court, over the Germanization and heroization of the Gospels in the Saxon Heliand, to the incorporation of the Grail material into the high medieval chivalric novel, all these endeavors to unify Germanic heroism and Christian interiority present a new ideal of man and society, which combined the radical self-responsibility and loneliness of the pre-Christian hero and the ideal of combative defiance even against the greatest superior power with the ideal of the quest, the striving for transcendent fulfillment, the highest moral self-demands and active charity in the service of the weak. All traits that are also common to Tolkien's heroes from early Beleriand to the Fellowship of the Rings of the late Third Age. The fact that this religious, heroic ideal of man gradually receded into the shadows of society at the beginning of the modern era was therefore hardly due to the influence of Christianity, as is often read in neo-pagan milieus, but rather to the materialist priorities of the newly arising bourgeois society on the one hand and the territorial hunger of the new Machiavellian sovereigns on the other. Nevertheless, the ideal of Christian chivalry would continue to shape the education and self-image of the Western elite until well into the 17th century, despite changes in the framework conditions, and would organically transform into the type of the gentiluomo, the gentilhomme, and finally the gentleman that emerged in the 18th century, which in turn only met its end in the trenches of the First World War and the totalitarian excesses of the Second World War, and which today receives the coup de grâce through its ideological discredit as old white men. Only the link to this heroic Christian tradition, but never its rejection, can therefore make it possible to overcome the present crisis of civilization and help the West to experience at least a worthy conclusion of its aging civilization despite all internal and external distresses. From this perspective, the fact that the memory of the earliest heroic or Nordic days of our culture is once again dawning in our late times is perhaps even a positive sign, suggesting that in the worst times of need, we might be able to grow some last strength from the hidden depth of our subconscious. But such a strengthening must not take place at the price of a rejection of what actually constitutes our culture. Western Christianity, with all its ups and downs, is and remains the ultimate framework that has enabled Western men to find the way towards transcendence, the ultimate goal of mankind over the last 1,000 years. Of course, a final return to the old Christian tradition and its historical ideal of man, which would also have to take place against the resistance of many of today's churches, still seems a long way off. But it is usually precisely in the darkest hour that hope is closest, but only at the price of tenacious and unconditional perseverance. Tolkien's work also provides a point of reference for this, namely his theory of the eucatastrophe, a twist of fate based on the insight into the fundamentally flawed nature of man, who even with the purest of hearts can only fail in the attempt to prevail only on his own. But it is precisely at the moment of that failure that help, sometimes, comes from above and can still make the effort succeed, even though often in unexpected ways, whether in the positive guise of the eagle or the saving Vala, or through the actually rather negative intervention of people like Gollum, whose wickedness ultimately contributes unintentionally to the good. This is a highly interesting figure of thought that combines the intrinsic failure of man in his heroic fight against nature and society, as in the pre-Christian tragic tradition, with the anthropology of Christian faith, where the fall of man, his constant struggle for good, his ultimate failure and divine mercy are similarly inseparable. Therefore, we too do not want to give up the hope that adherence to our vision of man, loyalty to our faith, and love for our Western civilization might in the end, despite or precisely because of their possible failure, bear fruits in an unexpected way and be rewarded by a quasi-Hesperialist final flowering. But even without this faint hope, it would be a betrayal of the greatness of our culture if we wanted to be unfaithful in the hour of greatest need and resign ourselves to decline and fall, or to renounce 1,000 years of history in order to return to the pre-Christian Germanic gods. The same is true, of course, thou mutatis mutandis, to all those wanting to go back even earlier in time, such as those believing that only going back to the golden days of Greek classical philosophy and polis life could instill a new life to Western civilization, such as many members of the French Nouvelle Droite, as well as libertarians of all colors pretend, or such as those considering Christ and Muhammad as erring from the initial path of Abrahamic primordial monotheism. For if the history of philosophy demonstrates one thing, it is the ultimate failure of a philosophy rejecting transcendence as dogmatism. The belief in homo mensura already led the Greek sophists, as well as the Epicureans and the skeptics, astray, while all those philosophers going beyond mere rhetoricism and relativism, such as Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, the Neoplatonists, and even, though only partly, the Stoics, prefigured monotheism and even Trinitarianism, and thus became the second basis of Christianity besides the immediate revelation. The same is true with the erroneous belief that Christianity is only a Jewish heresy, for Christianity has not repealed but transcended Judaism and explicited much of what was only present in an implicit way, such as the true nature of love and sacrifice, the superiority of transcendence over immanence, or the immortality of the soul. Let us therefore also hope for a late autumn before winter for the West, a golden evening, to quote Theoden. And let us remember that the bittersweet ending of The Lord of the Rings was also supposed to be, according to its authors, an analogy to a potential restoration of a Holy Roman Empire with its seat in Rome. It would not be the first time in the history of the great civilizations that the final phase of civilizational decay would be followed by a final quasi-Augustan late flowering and religious restoration, which would give meaning and purpose to the entire course of the respective past. And even if this hope should be deceptive, let us consider in the midst of the ugliness of the modern world that it is precisely in the heroic failure that the actual beauty of existence is conceived, which is bought dearly but cheaply, as Manuel's herald said of the songs of the elves. We should at least not let ourselves be deprived of this last dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Engels, for such a profound and inspiring talk that will definitely provide food for thought to all of our viewers around the world to better understand our current world and how to better address the big challenges facing us. To conclude our conversation today, we will hear one final lecture about the very concept of civilization, what fosters it, what destroys it. So Jacek Małkowski is a business trainer and coach. He's the author of the Battle of Civilizations workshop and creator of the game 9 Habits of Strong Catholic Families, aimed at restoring Catholic identity and a stronger culture for children. He believes that a solid knowledge and understanding of what is a civilization is the best weapon to help people defend it. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me for this forum and for opportunity to share with you what I found out about civilization. Because I'm not an academic, I'm just a business trainer and a father of three. And therefore I struggle every day to retain true faith in my family, which isn't easy. And why it isn't easy? I found the answer in works of Professor Felix Koneczny, which leads me to a very strong conviction that this knowledge that he acquired through many years of his works in the field of civilization could be used for every one of us to be used for our communities, for our families, and for ourselves. Civilizationism, it seems so abstractive, but it's very practical at the very end. And I will try to show you that it's very pragmatic. And let's start with a riddle. And I invite every one of you to give an answer to this riddle, but just in your mind. Okay, ready? If we agree that the horse's tail is also a leg, how many legs a horse has? Do you have your answer? Don't divulge it, just memorize it. Okay, we will return to it. Now, a few words about the civilization. The definition of civilization may be a little confusing, because Professor Koneczny said, from his perspective, civilization is a method of organizing collective life. It exists everywhere, wherever there is a collective life, even the most primitive. It is a little bit abstract, so I tried to simplify it, to make some kind of analogy. Of course, it's not perfect, but I think it shows the meaning, the true meaning of civilization. Because sometimes we use civilization and culture as the same word, but there are differences. To show it, let's say, if we see a tree, we see just the top of it, right? The tree is not just branches and leaves, but also roots. But we don't see roots. What we see explicitly is visible artifacts of culture. Those are universities, those are railways, those are our convention over here. These are artifacts, visible artifacts of culture. What we don't see is beneath. The roots of this culture, it's primarily invisible core beliefs and convictions. And this is tacit knowledge. Sometimes we feel it, sometimes we know it, but sometimes we don't understand this culture, where it comes from, why this culture looks like it is, like we see it every day. And Professor Koneczny's works allows us to understand how we should take care of the roots to grow the really Christian culture. Because what surrounds us today is really chaotic world of values and ideas. And I must admit, I'm really perplexed how many men and women speaks to my children every day. I try to, with my wife, we try to talk with our people, to talk with our children every day, almost every day. How many minutes we can be together and talk about important things with our children? Have you ever, how many of you have children? Okay, so you have some idea about it. How much time can you use for your children, for not for, you know, caring, bathing, making homework, etc., but to talk about important things? How many? Who tells? 1 hour. Great man, this is Superman. Another examples? How?
10 minutes, quarter of an hour.
Yeah? And how many hours they listen to other people every day? 8 hours? More. It's about 10 hours to 12 hours every day. And do you think that all those people speaking to our children, they support our perspective of the world and Christianity? On the contrary. Most of them provide mutilated values, insane ideas, and those mutilated ideas, those chaotic values will grow roots in our children, but not Christian roots. Therefore, they are very, it's very possible for them to detach from Catholic Church, from faith, when they grow up, because they have twisted roots. Study of civilization, it may be called philosophy of history. It's a discipline that discovers the rules that govern the development of human societies. Therefore, we all should know maybe just basics about the civilizationism, but it's essential for not just for our kids, but also for our communities, because we make impact on the other people. Every one of you makes this impact. And because of how you speak, how you show things, you affect how the other people grows their roots, especially if they have no roots, almost no roots. So, study of civilizations is quite young branch of knowledge, but it has some span of life already. It's about 150 years. So we really learned a lot of things about it. From Max Weber through Oswald Spengler, very pessimistic work, The Decline of the West, through Professor Felix Konečný, which I found so amazingly for me. But it goes farther and farther. Professor Arnold Toynbee, he wrote, how to say, for Felix... Forward? Yeah, forward, yeah, for work of Professor Felix Konečný. Then we have Francis Fukuyama, The End of History and the Last Man. So everything is over, in fact. But even Samuel Huntington disagreed with him and wrote The Clash of Civilizations. Professor Konečný named it more specifically. He was talking about war of civilizations. And I don't mean war just by, guns and bombs. The most important wars are on the field of culture and civilization roots. And what Professor Konečný found, that all civilizations he studied can be seen in 5 perspectives. And the first one, the most important, that defines all the others, is the truth. And now, let's go back to our horse. Please, hands up, how many of you was in a favor of 5 legs? Okay, it's about half of us. So I understand that the other, but I will ask, how many of you was in favor of 4 legs? Oh, the minority. This riddle is not mine. It was constructed, prepared by a professor of logic from faculty in Vilno before the Second World War. And he asked this riddle to every first-year students that attended his lecture. And when he sees these answers that if we agree the horse has 5 legs, he always said, my dear people, regardless of how we agree, a horse has 4 legs. And that's the truth. Because we cannot agree on facts. The facts we can observe, we should analyze, we should find the truth. There are no 5-legged horse. But when I first came to this riddle, I also answered 5. And it opened my eyes at the end, because it shows that we are not immune to this chaotic world around us. We can also be deceived. Even if we feel we are really prepared, really educated Christians, Catholics, etc. Sorry to say, but that's not true. We have to be very, very vigilant, and not just for our kids, but for ourselves as well. Therefore, the truth is the foundation. We always should be very, very careful what we deem the truth is. Because if not, a snail becomes a fish. A carrot becomes a fruit. Do you recognize those things from our present world? It's in the law. That's the truth that can be negotiated. But the truth from Catholic faith, from our civilization, cannot be negotiated. It can be only observed and taken into our hearts. The second perspective is about good. What is good and what is wrong? There are so many connections with what David said about the Tolkien work, because all of these things that Professor Koneczny discovers when I found Professor's works connected me with Tolkien's works as well, because I grow on Tolkien. It was my Bible because I was raised not in a Catholic family. And thanks to Tolkien work, and mostly thanks to my wife, I returned to faith and to the church. And that's why it's so important for me to know how to defend my family and how to help my children to grow into faith and not to be deceived. Next perspective is about beauty. In our civilization, there is a canon of beauty. There are things that are beautiful, and there are things that are ugly. If there is no such a canon, we can observe every day on our streets people with pants with those holes. This is garbage. this is ugliness, but they like it very much. And they say, no, it's not ugly, it's beautiful, it's great. Not from our perspective. And there are many, many more examples for this. The last two perspectives from Professor Koneczny works are about welfare and health. We don't have time to analyze all of this, but we can compare every civilization through these 5 perspectives to understand what are the differences between our civilizations. Because it's very important for us to find what connects us with other people, but we should also understand where is the dividing line. Which elements cannot be reconciled, because not everything can be reconciled. What is latent civilization? The first element is Greek wisdom. And from Greeks we learned several very important values, like personalism. It was not invented by Christianity, where Christianity prepared Christian personalism. But Greeks started with personalism as it was in Homer's works, for example. Then the reason, patriotism, justice, beauty, moderation. Almost whole canon of beauty comes from Greek wisdom. It came to our civilization. Then we have Roman law. Just 3 examples. First, ius lex, that says that statutory law results from justice. Morality is superior to law. So not every time the law is the ultimate measure. We should judge everything through our morality first. Then we have something like clare et distincta. The law must be understandable to everyone. How do you feel about the law created around us in today's world? Is it clear for you? Or maybe not. For me, it's not clear. The ultimate measure should be that people from Parliament creating the law should go with this project to the street, give it to the first person, and ask if it's understandable to you. If it's not, it should be torn and thrown away. Romans said, clare et distincta. And this is not the way how it is right now. So it already shows that we are going farther and farther from the core of our Latin civilization. And the last one, avoiding elephantiasis of the law. So the more matters regulated by custom and not by law, the better. And again, is it the case in our world? Is it really the case that we use mostly customs to resolve all the arguments, etc., etc.? From the Latin perspective, creating a law is a failure, because that means that we cannot agree on something. We need to put a policeman to stand above us, and to police us, to obey the law, because we couldn't agree on something. That's a failure. I understand somehow, especially in big societies, there is no way to avoiding law, but always first should come customs. But then comes Catholic ethic, and it includes Greek wisdom, Roman law as well, because in Latin civilization, morality is, it's not totalitarian, it's not the word. It should imbue every aspect of our life. So 3 things, the most important: Christian personalism, self-governance, and state subsidiarity. And of course, these are not all aspects of Latin civilization, but quite important. Those three roots, Greek wisdom, Roman law, and Catholic ethic, forms roots for Latin civilization. Going further, key features of the society and state of Latin civilization, it's to sum up: personalism, self-governance, and subsidiarity. I was asked to compare Latin civilization to other civilizations. I just took two additional because there are too many civilizations, to see all of them during this short meeting. But I will show you three: Latin civilization, Byzantine one, and Turanic. In Latin civilization, and as you can see, we've got colors for every of those aspects. Latin civilization is like this. So the most important thing is personalism. It's the man that creates and should govern everything. Of course, there is a need for self-governance. I mean, some communities, etc., ruled by customs, eventually by law, but as the last resort. And then there is, of course, some space for state, but it can't be overwhelming. It's subsidiary for the man of Latin civilization. In Byzantine civilization, there's quite a different view. The state is overwhelming. There is no life beyond the state. Everything is regulated, allowed, or declined by the state. Of course, there is a little space for personal development, but it's also regulated, it's also in borders declared by the state. And self-governance, it's at minimum. To understand Turanic civilization, we need to add one perspective additional. It's power. Because Turanic civilization is all about the power. There is, of course, some space for state, for governors, for bureaucracy, but at the very low level, and some space for self-governance, because the ruler in Turanic civilization doesn't care about the rules in your family. You can judge for yourself, you can decide, unless he decides otherwise. And there is no personalism at all, because Turanic civilizations are collective. And okay, I'll try to show you something. Oh, we cannot. Maybe we don't have time, maybe other time. Do you think that you can point to a country where Turanic civilization right now exists? With a very, very strong leader, and it's all about the power and military. Yes? No? Russian, of course. And it's always been. Because Turanic civilizations come from deep Asian steppes. It came to Europe with Mongols. And it stayed, especially in Russia, where Tsar is the master of everything. And very important thing is that people of Russia want it this way. They want him to be a ruler that provides stability, that is a conqueror, and he brings security for them as well. They understand it this way. We will go further because there is no time for more. Yeah.
Yes, if you can conclude briefly, please.
I will just. Every civilization can be observed by a specific behavior. And I've made my own experiments in everyday life, like crossing a street. Men from different civilization cross the street differently. For example, when you are from Turanic civilization, red, green doesn't matter. You show your power, and it's red, it's green, cars coming, doesn't matter. You go. Because you show your power over the others. Unless there is a representative of authority, then you will show your obedience. So if there is red, you stand up. If there is green, you go. Byzantine civilization, and I saw it, it's like this. If there is a red, you wait. If there is green, you go. But what if there is red and it's broken at the intersection of streets? What happens then? I saw it because I experienced it several times. And I saw people waiting, 1, 2, 3, the light is broken, so they go around the intersection. Even if there is no car at all, it doesn't matter. You cannot break the law. The law forbids going through red, so you go around. Latin civilization makes you making responsible decisions. So, of course, if there is red, I wait for green. But if there is no cars at all, there is no harm in going even when it's red. And I saw it in London, in New York, and it was, for me, it was very amazing when we go the other way with the policeman on the red. And we cheer to each other. There was no problem because there were no cars at the moment. So what I would like to ask you is to know more about the civilization and especially about Latin, our civilization, and how to grow right roots for ourselves and for our children. Because right now, I cannot detect any Latin civilization country at all. That's depressing, but there is also a hope at the end. Because Professor Koneczny said, if there is only one man still fighting for Latin civilization, there is hope. Because we believe in personalism. So one man can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Małkowski, for a very didactic and interactive demonstration. Well, we've heard very different testimonies and perspectives tonight that will be debated more collectively tomorrow for our second session, during which we will also answer the questions from the audience. So our meeting tomorrow will last around 1 hour and a half, no more, just to have a conversation and to enable us to properly close today's conversation. And we also try to refocus a little bit our attention, our focus on Nordic peoples, because we've discussed a lot of very different things, and it would be very interesting to really connect all that to the essence of Nordic people and how they can be a source of inspiration to us all nowadays. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for all those who are watching from different parts of the world. And see you tomorrow, 7 p.m., same place, 7 p.m. Stockholm time, of course, here at the Museum of Visby. Thank you and good night.
for those who were here, I'm just have a last remark. For those who are here, all these recordings will appear in a program, and the connection with Chantal Del Sol has been not too good, but we will provide subtitles.